I opened my front door on a freezing January morning to find a woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair standing on my porch, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. Behind her, a commercial snow removal truck sat idling in my driveway, and I immediately knew something was wrong. "Good morning. I'm Deborah Palmer, president of the Oakmont Heights Homeowners Association." She extended her hand, which I shook hesitantly. "I'm here to inform you that starting today, you're required to use our approved snow removal service. The team is here to get started on your property." I glanced at the truck, then back at her. "I already have a snow removal service. My neighbor's son handles it for me, has for the past 2 winters." Deborah's smile tightened. "I'm afraid that arrangement is no longer acceptable. According to the recent amendments to our HOA bylaws, all residents must use pristine snow services. It's a matter of uniformity and quality control." The cold wind whipped around us as I tried to process what she was saying. I had moved to this neighborhood in Oakmont Heights, just outside Denver, Colorado, 3 years ago, drawn by the mountain views and the promise of a tight-knit community. The HOA had seemed reasonable enough at first, but lately, things had been changing. "I never agreed to any amendments," I said, crossing my arms, "and I'm happy with the service I have." She clicked her pen and made a note on her clipboard. "The amendments were approved by the board in December. All homeowners were notified via email and postal mail. Your participation isn't optional, Mr. Warren Wilson. The contract specifies a fee of $350 per month during the snow season, which runs November through April. $350. I was currently paying Tyler, my neighbor's 19-year-old son, $150 for the entire winter. He did a great job, showed up promptly after every snowfall, and even threw down salt on my walkway without being asked." "I didn't receive any notice," I said firmly. "And even if I had, I have the right to choose my own contractors. This is my property." Deborah's expression hardened. "The covenants you signed when you purchased this home give the HOA authority over exterior maintenance standards. This includes snow removal. If you refuse to comply, you'll be subject to fines of $100 per day, plus the cost of the service, which we'll have performed anyway and bill to your account." $100 per day. My blood pressure spiked. "You can't be serious." "I'm quite serious, Mr. Wilson. This is about maintaining property values and ensuring the neighborhood looks its best. We can't have random, unvetted individuals providing services in our community." Random. Tyler lived 3 houses down. His father, Greg Hutchins, was on the local volunteer fire department. I'd had dinner at their house multiple times. "I want to see these amendments in writing," I said, "and I want to review the authority the HOA actually has to mandate this." Deborah pulled a thick packet from her bag and handed it to me. "Everything you need is right here. You have until noon today to call Pristine Snow Services and set up your account. The number is on page 7. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Wilson." She walked back to the truck, spoke briefly with the driver, and then got into her silver Lexus and drove away. The snow removal truck followed her. I stood there, packet in hand, watching my breath form clouds in the frigid air. Inside, I made coffee and started reading through the documents. The amendments were dated December 5th, nearly 2 months ago. According to the paperwork, the HOA had held a special meeting to vote on several changes to the community bylaws. The snow removal mandate was buried on page 12 of a 30-page document, written in dense legal language that made my head hurt. What caught my attention was the voting record. The amendments had passed with a vote of 5-2, but there were over 200 homes in Oakmont Heights. How could 7 board members make a decision that affected everyone without broader input? I pulled out the original HOA documents I'd received when I bought the house. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions CC and Articus were extensive, covering everything from fence heights to paint colors. I spent the next 3 hours reading through them, making notes and cross-referencing with the amendments Deborah had given me. By noon, I'd found several problems. First, the original CC and Articus stated that any amendments affecting homeowner financial obligations exceeding $100 annually required a vote of at least 60% of all homeowners, not just the board. Second, the 30-day notice requirement for such votes hadn't been met. The meeting was announced on December 1st, with the vote held on December 5th. That was 5 days, not 30. I called my real estate attorney, Janet Kowalski, whom I'd used during the house purchase. Her secretary said she was in court but would call me back that afternoon. While I waited, I decided to do some research on Pristine Snow Services. A basic internet search revealed that the company had been incorporated in Colorado just 6 months ago. The registered agent was listed as Richard Palmer. Palmer, same last name as Deborah. I dug deeper. Richard Palmer was indeed related to Deborah. He was her husband. Their home address was listed as being in Oakmont Heights. I pulled up the county property records. They lived 4 streets over from me, in one of the larger homes in the development. This was starting to look like more than just an HOA being overly controlling. This looked like a conflict of interest, possibly even fraud. Janet called me back at 2:30. I explained the situation, and she asked me to scan and email her all the documents. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. "Wilson, this contract is garbage," she said without preamble. "There are multiple legal issues here. First, the voting procedure was definitely violated based on your original CC and Articus. Second, there's a clear conflict of interest if the HOA president is mandating use of her husband's company. Third, the penalties they're threatening are likely unenforceable. Colorado law has specific limitations on HOA fines and assessment increases. So what do I do? Don't pay anything. Don't sign anything. I'll draft a letter to the HOA board outlining the legal deficiencies in their amendments and demanding they cease enforcement. In the meantime, keep using your current snow removal service and document everything. Take photos, keep receipts, save all communications. What if they try to find me anyway? Let them. We'll challenge it. If necessary, we'll file an injunction, but I doubt it'll come to that. Once they realize you've got legal representation and know your rights, they'll probably back off." I thanked her and hung up, feeling slightly better but still uneasy. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 3 years without major problems. I served on the community garden committee, attended neighborhood barbecues, and got along with most of my neighbors. The last thing I wanted was to become the guy fighting with the HOA. But I also wasn't going to be pushed around or forced to pay for something I didn't need or want. The next morning, I woke to find a notice taped to my front door. It was from Deborah Palmer, stating that I had failed to comply with the snow removal mandate and was now subject to daily fines of $100, retroactive to yesterday. According to the notice, I already owed $200. I photographed the notice and sent it to Janet. Then I called Tyler. "Hey, Mr. Wilson," he answered cheerfully. "We're supposed to get 6 inches tonight. I'll be over first thing tomorrow morning." "Sounds good, Tyler. Listen, have you heard anything about an HOA requirement to use a specific snow removal company?" "Oh yeah, my dad got that notice too. He told them to pound sand." Tyler laughed. "Actually, he was a lot more polite, but that was the gist. A bunch of neighbors are pretty mad about it." "Have any of them decided to comply?" "I don't think so. Most people already have arrangements, Mrs." Chen does her own driveway with her snowblower. The Rodriguez family has a landscaping company that handles theirs year-round. This whole thing seems like a money grab to me. After we hung up, I decided to reach out to some neighbors. I started with Greg Hutchins, Tyler's dad. Greg invited me over, and I walked down the street to his house. He was a stocky man in his 50s with a gray beard and warm demeanor. We sat in his living room with mugs of hot chocolate while his wife, Maria, joined us. "Deborah Palmer has lost her mind," Greg said bluntly. "She's been getting more and more controlling over the past year. First it was the rule about holiday decorations, remember that? They had to be approved by the aesthetic committee before you could put them up." I remembered. Mrs. Chen had gotten a violation notice because her inflatable snowman was 2 feet taller than the regulations allowed. Then it was the thing about parking, Maria added. No commercial vehicles in driveways, even overnight. That affected at least a dozen families who have work trucks. "But this is different," Greg continued. "This is mandating we pay for a service, and it's expensive. Janet Kowalski is my attorney too, by the way. She's sending them a letter on my behalf as well." "How many people do you think are refusing?" I asked, last count. "At least 30 families that I know of. Could be more. There's a meeting tomorrow night at the community center. Unofficial, not organized by the HOA, just concerned residents. You should come." I agreed and spent the rest of the day working from my home office. I was a software engineer for a telecommunications company, which meant I had the flexibility to handle my schedule. It also meant I was home during the day, making me very aware of the comings and goings in the neighborhood. At around 3 in the afternoon, I noticed a pristine snow services truck driving slowly through the neighborhood, the driver taking photos of houses. When the truck passed my house, it slowed almost to a stop. The driver, a thin man wearing a company jacket, pointed a camera at my driveway and took several pictures. I went outside. "Can I help you?" The driver looked startled. "Just doing a survey for potential clients." "I'm not a potential client. I have my own service." He shrugged and drove off. I made a note of the truck's license plate and took my own photos. That evening, more notices appeared on doors throughout the neighborhood. I knew because my phone started buzzing with messages. Someone had created a group chat called Oakmont HOA Resistance and added me to it. There were already 47 members. The messages were flying fast. Screenshots of notices, angry comments, and speculation about Deborah Palmer's motives. Someone named Kevin posted a link to Pristine Snow Services business registration, showing Richard Palmer as the owner. Another person, Stephanie, revealed that she'd seen Deborah's car parked at the Pristine Snow Services office, which was in a small commercial plaza about 5 miles from our neighborhood. The next evening, I attended the meeting at the community center. Over 70 people showed up, filling the main room. The energy was tense, with small groups clustered together, talking in low, urgent voices. Greg Hutchins stood at the front and called for attention. "Thanks for coming, everyone. I think we all know why we're here. The HOA board, specifically Deborah Palmer, is trying to force us to use a snow removal service owned by her husband. This is wrong on multiple levels, and we need to figure out how to fight it." A man I recognized as Tom Rodriguez raised his hand. "I run a landscaping business. I know the industry. This Pristine Snow Services is charging almost triple what the going rate is. $350 per month is highway robbery. I could provide the same service for half that." "Can they even do this legally?" a woman asked. "Force us to use a specific company?" I stood up. "I've spoken with an attorney. The short answer is no, not the way they've done it. The amendments weren't properly voted on, and there's a clear conflict of interest. My attorney is sending them a letter challenging the mandate." Mine too, Greg added. And I encourage everyone else to do the same. Strength in numbers. An older woman named Dorothy raised her hand. I'm on a fixed income. I can't afford $350 a month. My grandson does my driveway for free. Are they really going to fine me $100 a day? The room erupted in angry murmurs. The situation was affecting everyone differently, but the common thread was outrage at being told what to do with our own properties. Someone suggested we organize a petition to recall the HOA board. Another person recommended filing a class action lawsuit. By the end of the meeting, we'd formed an action committee with 10 volunteers, including myself, to coordinate the response. Over the next week, several things happened. First, Janet Kowalski sent her letter to the HOA board, laying out the legal deficiencies in their amendment and demanding they rescind the mandate. Second, 43 homeowners received formal fine notices, totaling over $30,000 collectively. Third, Pristine Snow Services trucks began showing up in the neighborhood without permission, clearing driveways, and then sending bills to homeowners. I received my first unauthorized service on a Thursday morning. I woke to find my driveway already cleared, and a bill for $125 taped to my door. The bill was marked as an emergency service charge since I hadn't arranged for regular service. I called the number on the bill and got a receptionist who sounded bored. Pristine Snow Services, how can I help you? I just received a bill for services I didn't request or authorize. Name and address, please. I provided them. I heard typing. According to our records, your property is listed for mandatory service under the Oakmont Heights HOA contract. The bill is valid. Payment is due within 15 days. I didn't sign any contract with your company. I don't want your service. You entered my property without permission. Take it up with your HOA, sir. We're just fulfilling our contract with them. Who authorized you to enter private property? The HOA has authorized access to all properties within the community for purposes of the contracted services. If you have issues, contact Deborah Palmer. I hung up, furious. This was escalating beyond a simple dispute. This was trespassing and potentially theft of services. I called Janet immediately. They can't do that, she said, her voice sharp. HOA authority doesn't extend to authorizing third parties to enter private property for commercial purposes without individual homeowner consent. This is getting serious, Wilson. I'm going to file for an injunction in district court. We're also going to need to report this to the county district attorney. There may be criminal elements here. Criminal, fraud, potentially extortion. Deborah Palmer is using her position to enrich her husband's business through coercion and threats. That's illegal. The next day, Janet filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against both the HOA and Pristine Snow Services, barring them from entering my property or assessing fines until the legal issues could be resolved. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Over the weekend, the situation in the neighborhood became increasingly polarized. Some homeowners, particularly those who weren't home during the day and didn't want to deal with snow removal themselves, decided to just pay for the Pristine service. Others doubled down on resistance. Someone spray-painted HOA corruption on the community center sign. Another person started a website documenting the conflict, complete with financial analysis showing the money the Palmers stood to make from the scheme. On Monday morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA attorney, Marcus Webb of Webb and Associates. The letter threatened legal action against me for defaming the HOA and Deborah Palmer. Apparently, my comments at the community meeting had been reported back to her, and she was claiming I'd slandered her by suggesting she was engaged in self-dealing. Janet laughed when I showed her the letter. This is intimidation, nothing more. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and everything you've said is factual and provable. They're grasping at straws. The court hearing on Tuesday was held at the Boulder County Justice Center. Judge Raymond Martinez presided. I sat with Janet at the plaintiff's table while Marcus Webb represented the HOA and Pristine Snow Services. Deborah Palmer sat in the gallery, her expression icy. Judge Martinez reviewed the motion and the supporting documents. Counsel, this appears to be a contractual dispute between a homeowner and his HOA. Why are we seeking emergency relief? Janet stood. Your Honor, this goes beyond a simple contract dispute. The defendant HOA has authorized a private company to trespass on my client's property and perform unwanted services, then demanded payment under threat of escalating fines. The HOA president has a financial interest in the company, creating an improper conflict of interest. My client's property rights are being violated daily. Marcus Webb rose. Your Honor, the HOA has broad authority under the CC and Articles to maintain community standards, including contracting for services that benefit all residents. The plaintiff agreed to HOA governance when he purchased his property. This is simply buyer's remorse and an unwillingness to contribute to the community. Has the HOA authorized entry onto the plaintiff's property? The judge asked. Webb hesitated. The HOA contract with Pristine Snow Services includes access rights for necessary maintenance. Did the plaintiff consent to this access? Consent is implicit in HOA membership. Judge Martinez frowned. That's a stretch, counselor. What about the conflict of interest allegation? Is it true that the HOA president's spouse owns the snow removal company? Webb shifted uncomfortably. Richard Palmer is one of several owners of Pristine Snow Services. Mrs. Palmer properly recused herself from the board vote on the service contract. She recused herself from the vote, but she personally delivered the mandate to my client's home and has been the primary enforcer of the policy, Janet interjected. She's also been sending fine notices under her signature as HOA president. Judge Martinez made notes. I'm going to grant a temporary restraining order. The HOA and Pristine Snow Services are barred from entering the plaintiff's property without explicit consent. They are also barred from assessing fines related to the snow removal mandate until this matter can be fully heard. I'm scheduling a preliminary injunction hearing for 3 weeks from today. In the meantime, both parties will have the opportunity to conduct discovery and present evidence. Webb started to object, but the judge raised his hand. This is my ruling. If the HOA believes it has the authority it claims, it will have the opportunity to prove that. Until then, the status quo is maintained. Outside the courtroom, Deborah Palmer confronted me. You're destroying this community, you and your little band of rebels. All we're trying to do is maintain standards and property values. By forcing everyone to use your husband's company, that's not about standards, that's about profit. Her face reddened. You'll regret this. The HOA has resources, will make your life miserable. Is that a threat, Mrs. Palmer? Janet stepped between us. Because if it is, we'll add harassment to our complaint. Deborah stalked off without another word. As I watched her leave, I felt both relieved and worried. The temporary restraining order was a victory, but the battle was far from over. The next 3 weeks were intense. Janet subpoenaed HOA financial records and meeting minutes. What she discovered was damning. The HOA had signed a 5-year contract with Pristine Snow Services worth over $700,000. Richard Palmer's business stood to make a fortune, and the contract included provisions that would make it nearly impossible to break even if the HOA wanted to switch providers. More troubling, the meeting minutes revealed that Deborah Palmer hadn't actually recused herself from the vote. She'd voted in favor of the contract, and her vote had been decisive. The minutes had been altered after the fact to show her as abstaining, but the original version, retrieved from the HOA management company's backup files, told the true story. Janet also discovered that the HOA board had authorized a loan to fund the first year of the contract with pristine snow services, using HOA reserves as collateral. The reserves were meant for emergency repairs and maintenance, not to finance sweetheart deals with board members' family businesses. Meanwhile, the situation in the neighborhood continued to deteriorate. The group chat had grown to over 100 members. People were sharing stories of harassment and intimidation. One family reported that someone had filed a false complaint with the county about their fence, triggering an inspection. Another said their car had been keyed while parked in their driveway. Not all of it could be directly traced to the HOA, but the timing was suspicious. The community was fracturing, with neighbors who'd been friends for years now barely speaking to each other. Greg Hutchins organized another meeting, this time with over 100 attendees. A local news reporter showed up, having heard about the controversy. The story aired 2 days later on Denver's NBC affiliate, with the headline HOA Conflict of Interest Sparks Neighborhood Battle. The news coverage changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just a local dispute. The story was picked up by other news outlets, and by the end of the week, it had gone semi-viral on social media. The narrative of a power-hungry HOA president forcing residents to use her husband's company resonated with people who'd had their own HOA horror stories. Deborah Palmer's response was to go on the defensive. She gave an interview to the same news station, claiming she was being unfairly vilified for trying to improve the neighborhood. She insisted there was no impropriety, that the contract had been properly approved, and that residents were simply being difficult. The interview backfired spectacularly. Her condescending tone and refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing made her look exactly like the stereotype of the power-mad HOA president. Comments on the video were overwhelmingly negative. As the preliminary injunction hearing approached, the HOA's attorney filed several motions trying to delay or dismiss the case. All were denied. Judge Martinez was clearly losing patience with what he saw as legal maneuvering designed to avoid accountability. The hearing took place on a cold February morning. The courtroom was packed with neighborhood residents, reporters, and interested observers. Janet presented her evidence methodically. The improper vote, the falsified minutes, the conflict of interest, the unauthorized property access, and the use of HOA funds to finance the contract. Marcus Webb tried to argue that HOAs had broad powers and that minor procedural irregularities didn't invalidate the contract. He claimed that the majority of residents supported the snow removal service and that only a vocal minority was causing problems. Janet countered with a petition signed by over 120 homeowners opposing the mandate, more than half the neighborhood. She also presented evidence that many of the residents who'd signed up for the pristine service had done so only under threat of fines, not because they wanted it. The most dramatic moment came when Janet called Richard Palmer to the stand as a hostile witness. He looked nervous, tugging at his tie as he was sworn in. "Mr. Palmer, you own Pristine Snow Services, correct? I'm one of the owners, yes. And your wife is the president of the Oakmont Heights HOA, yes." Did you discuss the possibility of pristine snow services contracting with the HOA with your wife? He hesitated. We may have discussed it. Did she advise you to submit a bid for the contract? I don't recall specifically. Janet pulled out a document. This is an email from your wife to you, dated November 10th of last year. In it, she tells you that the HOA board is looking for a snow removal contractor and suggests you submit a proposal. She also provides you with information about competing bids. Do you remember this email? Richard Palmer's face went pale. I may have received that. Did you use the information about competing bids to underbid them? Marcus Webb objected, but Judge Martinez overruled him. Answer the question, Mr. Palmer. I priced our services competitively. Your bid came in 15% lower than the nearest competitor, but your actual prices to homeowners are 40% higher than market rate. How do you explain that discrepancy? The contract with the HOA has overhead costs, such as administrative fees, insurance, equipment. Did you pay the HOA any kind of kickback or referral fee? No. Are you sure? Because the HOA's financial records show a payment from Pristine Snow Services to the HOA operating account in December, labeled as a partnership enhancement fee. What is that? Richard Palmer looked at his attorney, who looked at Deborah Palmer. The silence stretched. Mr. Palmer, I asked you a question. That was a standard business arrangement. A business arrangement where you pay the HOA $12,000. The HOA then mandates that all residents use your service, and you charge inflated rates. That sounds like a kickback scheme to me. Webb objected strenuously, but the damage was done. Judge Martinez recessed the hearing for lunch, and when we returned, he had clearly made up his mind. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, he said. This court finds that the HOA's snow removal mandate is unenforceable for several reasons. First, the amendment process violated the HOA's own governing documents by not obtaining proper approval from the homeowners. Second, there is clear evidence of a conflict of interest that was not properly disclosed or managed. Third, the use of HOA funds to finance a contract that directly benefits a board member's family business is improper. Fourth, authorizing entry onto private property without individual homeowner consent exceeds the HOA's authority. He paused, letting his words sink in. I'm issuing a preliminary injunction barring the HOA from enforcing the snow removal mandate, assessing fines related to it, or authorizing any third party to enter homeowners' property for snow removal purposes without explicit consent. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to refund any fines or fees already collected in relation to this mandate. The HOA board is directed to hold a properly noticed vote of all homeowners regarding any future service mandates. Relief washed over me. Around the courtroom, I heard gasps and murmurs of approval from the neighborhood residents who'd attended. But Judge Martinez wasn't done. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the Boulder County District Attorney's Office for investigation. The evidence suggests possible fraud, misappropriation of funds, and other potential criminal violations. This court does not look favorably on abuse of power, regardless of the context. Deborah Palmer stood abruptly and left the courtroom, her face flushed. Richard Palmer followed, and they were met by reporters outside. I watched on the courthouse monitors as they pushed through the crowd without commenting. Over the next several weeks, the situation unfolded rapidly. The district attorney, Karen Morrison, opened an investigation into the HOA board's conduct. Subpoenas were issued for documents and testimony. The local news continued covering the story, and it turned out that Oakmont Heights wasn't the only neighborhood where pristine snow services had tried similar arrangements. Reports came in from 2 other Colorado communities where the Palmers had connections to HOA boards and similar mandates had been attempted. In our neighborhood, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Under pressure from residents and facing potential criminal charges, 3 of the 5 board members resigned, including Deborah Palmer. She released a brief statement saying she was stepping down to focus on personal matters and denied any wrongdoing. An interim board was elected, with Greg Hutchins as president. One of their first actions was to terminate the contract with Pristine Snow Services for cause, citing fraud and misrepresentation. The company threatened to sue, but backed down when the HOA's attorney provided evidence that would be used in the criminal investigation. The district attorney's investigation concluded in late April. Deborah Palmer and Richard Palmer were both charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, and misappropriation of funds. The charges detailed how they had systematically used Deborah's position to direct business to Richard's company, taken kickbacks disguised as fees, and threatened homeowners with illegal fines to enforce the scheme. The story made headlines again. The image of Deborah Palmer being led into the Boulder County Courthouse for her arraignment became the defining photo of HOA overreach for that news cycle. As for me, I continued using Tyler's snow removal service for the rest of the winter. The charges against me were dropped, the fines were refunded with interest, and the HOA even sent a formal apology letter acknowledging the violations of my property rights. The Palmers ultimately pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testifying against their business partners, who had helped set up similar schemes in other communities. They were sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to pay restitution. Pristine Snow Services was dissolved as part of the plea agreement. The neighborhood slowly began to heal. The new HOA board, under Greg's leadership, implemented transparency reforms including regular financial audits, published meeting minutes, and a requirement that any proposed amendments be approved by a majority vote of all homeowners, not just the board. I stayed involved with the HOA, serving on the Reformed Governance Committee. We drafted new bylaws that strictly limited the board's authority and included strong conflict of interest provisions. The experience had shown all of us how quickly power could be abused when oversight was lacking. One warm evening in May, several months after the whole ordeal began, I was grilling in my backyard when Greg stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. "Thought you might want some company," he said. We sat on my patio, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The snow had melted, spring flowers were blooming, and the neighborhood felt peaceful again. "Think we overreacted?" I asked, half joking. Greg shook his head. "Not even a little. What the Palmers did was criminal, literally. If you hadn't stood up to them, they'd still be running their scam, and who knows what they would have tried next. Maybe mandatory landscaping services, mandatory house painting. Once they realized they could get away with it, there'd be no stopping them." He was right. The case had been about more than just snow removal. It had been about property rights, about the limits of community governance, and about holding people accountable when they abused positions of trust. "Plus," Greg continued, "you made the HOA actually work the way it's supposed to. We've got more participation now than we've had in years. People are paying attention. That's healthy." I raised my beer. "To vigilance." He clinked his bottle against mine. "And to neighbors who have your back." The legal bills had been substantial, even though Janet had given me a discount, and we'd eventually recovered costs from the HOA's insurance. But it had been worth it. I'd learned that standing up for your rights wasn't always easy or convenient, but it was necessary. The story continued to have ripples beyond our neighborhood. The Colorado State Legislature actually took up the issue, with several lawmakers proposing reforms to HOA governance laws. The case was cited as evidence that HOAs needed stronger oversight and that homeowners needed better protections against board overreach. A few national HOA reform organizations reached out to me, asking if I'd be willing to speak about my experience. I did a few interviews and even spoke at a community meeting in Boulder where residents were dealing with their own HOA issues. It felt good to help others understand their rights and feel empowered to push back against unfair practices. Tyler finished out the winter season taking care of my snow removal, and when spring came, I hired him to handle my lawn care too. He was saving money for college, and I was happy to support a good kid who did quality work. As summer approached, life in Oakmont Heights returned to normal. The Community Garden Committee, which I was still part of, organized a neighborhood barbecue. It was the first major social event since the HOA controversy, and there was some anxiety about how it would go, but the turnout was strong and the mood was positive. People seemed ready to move forward. There were still some who had supported Deborah Palmer and felt she'd been treated unfairly, but even they had to acknowledge that the criminal charges and evidence of fraud were serious matters. Mrs. Chen, who did her own snow removal with her trusty snowblower, came up to me at the barbecue. "Thank you for fighting," she said. "I'm too old to deal with lawyers and courts, but I was so angry about what they were trying to do. You stood up for all of us." Similar sentiments were echoed by others throughout the evening. It was humbling and gratifying to know that the fight had mattered to people beyond just myself. The criminal case against the Palmers concluded in August. As part of their sentencing, they were required to attend ethics training and were barred from serving on any HOA board in Colorado for 10 years. They ended up selling their house in Oakmont Heights and moving out of state, unable to face the neighbors they tried to exploit. The house sold quickly to a young family with 2 kids. I met them when they moved in and welcomed them to the neighborhood, making sure to mention that the HOA was under new management and things were much different now. In September, the reformed HOA board held its first annual meeting under the new bylaws. Over 150 residents attended, a record. Greg presented a comprehensive financial report showing exactly where every dollar of HOA funds had gone. It was a stark contrast to the secrecy and mismanagement of the previous board. During the open forum portion of the meeting, several residents spoke about the importance of staying engaged and not becoming complacent. One man, David Williams, put it well. "We learned the hard way that HOAs can be good or bad depending on who's running them and whether people are paying attention. Let's not forget that lesson." The meeting ended with elections for the next year's board. I was nominated but declined, feeling that I'd done my part and others should have a chance to serve. The new board was diverse, including longtime residents and newer homeowners, and I felt confident they'd continue the reforms. As fall arrived and the leaves began to change, I found myself reflecting on the entire experience. It had started with a simple confrontation on my porch on a January morning and had escalated into a legal battle, a criminal investigation, and ultimately significant reforms that would protect homeowners for years to come. The cost had been high, not just financially but emotionally. There had been stressful days when I'd questioned whether the fight was worth it, whether I should have just paid the money and avoided the conflict. But looking back, I knew I'd made the right choice. Property rights matter. The right to choose who provides services on your own land, the right to spend your money as you see fit, and the right to be free from coercion and fraud. These aren't trivial concerns. They're fundamental to the idea of homeownership and personal freedom. HOAs serve an important function. They maintain common areas, organize community activities, and help preserve property values. But they have to operate within appropriate boundaries, with transparency and accountability. When board members abuse their power for personal gain, they betray the trust of everyone in the community. The Oakmont Heights situation became a cautionary tale, referenced in articles about HOA governance, and used as a training example of what not to do. For those of us who lived through it, it was a reminder to stay informed, speak up when something seems wrong, and support neighbors who are willing to stand up against injustice. Tyler graduated high school that spring and got accepted to Colorado State University in Fort Collins. Before he left for college, he came by to say goodbye. "Thanks for believing in me," he said. "I know the whole HOA thing was about more than just my snow removal business, but it meant a lot that you fought to keep hiring me. You earned it by doing good work," I told him. "Don't let anyone ever tell you that honest work isn't valuable." As I watched him drive away, I thought about how the whole situation had affected so many people in different ways. Tyler had learned that his work mattered, and that sometimes adults do the right thing. The neighborhood had learned the importance of oversight and engagement. And I had learned that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, can make a real difference. The winter came around again, bringing snow and cold. I hired a different local teenager to handle my snow removal this year, a 16-year-old named Marcus who lived in the neighborhood. The first time it snowed, I watched from my window as he cleared my driveway, doing a thorough job and even salting the walkway without being asked. No one from the HOA bothered me about it. No fines, no notices, no threats. Just a teenager earning money by providing a service I wanted on my property under terms we'd agreed to. Simple. The way it should be. Greg stopped by that evening with updates on HOA business. The reserves had been replenished. A new management company had been hired with strict oversight requirements, and the community was thriving. Property values had actually increased, despite all the negative publicity, because people valued living in a place where homeowners had stood up against corruption. "You ever think about running for the board?" Greg asked. "We could use someone with your experience." I considered it but shook my head. "I think I've done enough HOA drama for one lifetime, but I'll stay involved, keep an eye on things. And if anyone ever tries to pull something like the Palmers did again, I'll be first in line to fight it." He laughed. "Fair enough. I think we've all had our fill of HOA drama too." As we talked, I realized that the whole experience, as stressful as it had been, had actually strengthened the community. People knew each other better now. They communicated more. They paid attention to HOA decisions and asked questions when something seemed off. The trauma had created resilience. Later that night, I sat in my living room with a book and a glass of whiskey, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. Outside, snow was falling again, blanketing the neighborhood in white. Tomorrow, Marcus would come clear my driveway. The mail would be delivered. Life would go on. I thought about Deborah Palmer and wondered if she'd learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like that rarely do. They always see themselves as victims, never acknowledging their own culpability. But that wasn't my concern anymore. She'd faced consequences for her actions, and that would have to be enough. The important thing was that the system had worked eventually. Yes, it had required effort and expense. Yes, it had been stressful and time-consuming. But justice had been served and the community was better for it, As I finished my whiskey and prepared for bed, I felt a sense of contentment. My home was truly mine, free from coercion and illegal mandates. My rights had been vindicated, and I'd played a part in creating lasting change that would benefit countless homeowners in the future. The fight against the HOA's overreach had been difficult, but it had been worth every moment. Because at the end of the day, standing up for what's right is always worth it. The pile of legal documents from the case sat in a folder on my shelf, a reminder of the battle and the victory. I hoped I'd never need to add to it, but if I did, I knew I had the knowledge and the courage to fight again. The snow continued falling outside, peaceful and beautiful, covering the neighborhood in a clean white blanket. And this time, I would handle its removal exactly as I chose, exercising my rights as a property owner in a community that had learned, the hard way, the importance of respecting those rights.